The marketplace was alive with noise and smoke. Strange smells filled the air and alien voices called out from every side. Daniel walked slowly through the crowd, his hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the dirty stalls where broken machines, strange animals, and unwanted beings were sold like objects. He had no reason to be there, he told himself. He was just a lonely man passing through, tired from long travel. His ship was broken, his credits were running low, and his heart was heavy with silence that never left him. Yet something in this dark place pulled him forward. A group of traders shouted, their laughter harsh and cruel. Daniel turned his head and saw them dragging a small figure onto a wooden platform. The figure was covered from head to toe, a rough sack pulled over the head, chains locked tight around thin wrists. The crowd jeered. Some aliens threw old fruit at the stage. The traders shouted, 3 credits! Only 3 for this useless thing. Daniel stopped walking, his breath caught for a moment. He could hear a muffled sound from under the sack, a soft whimper, almost like a child trying not to cry. He frowned, his heart beat faster. He told himself to look away, to keep moving, but his feet did not listen. The traders laughed again. Worthless, one of them shouted. Can't work, can't fight, nothing but trouble. Another slapped, the figure on the back making it stumble. The crowd roared with cruel amusement. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He had seen many ugly things in the galaxy, but this felt colder. He pushed through the crowd. His boots crunched on the dirt floor. He came closer, and the small figure trembled under the sack. Daniel could see the hands shaking, thin fingers gripping the chain. His chest grew heavy. Something deep inside told him that walking away would mean more than leaving a stranger behind. It would mean losing the last small piece of his own humanity. 3 credits, the trader repeated, looking straight at Daniel now. Come on, human, cheaper than a drink, cheaper than a meal. Take it if you want, no one else will. The crowd chuckled, some whispering that the human must be desperate or foolish. Daniel's hand moved to his pocket. He felt the small weight of coins, only a few left. He had been saving them for food, maybe to repair part of his ship. If he spent them here, he would have almost nothing left. He looked at the figure again. The sack moved slightly, as if the person inside was trying to breathe through fear. He could hear that faint, broken sound. Not loud, but enough to tear at his chest. Daniel spoke, his voice low but firm. I'll take her. The marketplace grew quiet for a heartbeat. The trader raised his eyebrow. You serious, human? For 3 credits? You don't even know what you're buying. Daniel did not answer. He pulled out the coins and held them up. His hand was steady, though his stomach twisted. He dropped the money into the trader's palm. The chains were unlocked. The trader shoved the trembling figure forward. Yours now, he said with a mocking smile. Don't say we didn't warn you. The crowd laughed again, but softer this time. Some shook their heads. Others muttered that the human was a fool. Daniel ignored them. He reached out and caught the small figure before it fell. The sack still covered the head, but he could feel the weakness in the body, light as air, fragile like glass. He guided her away from the stage, away from the noise and the stairs. His steps were steady, but inside he felt the weight of his choice pressing on him. He had spent almost all he had on someone he did not know, someone the world had thrown away. The further they walked from the market, the quieter the sounds became. Daniel stopped in a narrow alley where the air was cooler. He looked at the girl, still trembling, still trapped inside the sack. His fingers moved to the knot at the rope. Slowly, carefully, he began to untie it. For a moment, he hesitated. What would he see under the sack? What if the traders were right? What if she was dangerous, or cursed, or broken beyond help? His heart pounded. His hand trembled as the last knot came loose. He pulled the sack away, and the dim light of the alley fell on her face. Daniel froze. His breath caught in his throat. Under the sack was not a monster, not a beast, but a young, alien girl with delicate features. Her skin glowed faintly with silver patterns that shimmered like starlight. Her eyes, wide and fearful, looked straight at him. They were not empty. They were alive, though drowned in pain. She flinched as if expecting a strike. Her lips moved silently, a whisper of fear. But Daniel did not raise his hand. He only bent, lower, his voice calm. "It's all right, you're safe now." The girl blinked, confused, as if she could not believe the words. The sack slipped from his hand to the ground, and for the first time that day, Daniel felt the emptiness in his chest begin to change. Daniel stood in the quiet alley, the faint light touching the girl's face. Her silver eyes darted around, searching for danger. Her small body shook as if she expected him to push her back into chains. He could feel her fear like a cold wind against his skin. She tried to step back, but her legs were weak. She stumbled, nearly falling. Daniel caught her by the arm, gently, not with force. She froze at his touch, her breath coming in short gasps. "It's all right," Daniel whispered again. His voice was steady but soft. "No one will hurt you now." The girl stared at him, her lips trembling. For a moment it seemed she wanted to speak, but only silence came. She lowered her gaze as if ashamed of herself, as if even breathing was a crime. Daniel sighed. His heart ached at the sight. He remembered the laughter of the traders, the way they had mocked her, the way the crowd had thrown things as if she was trash. He felt anger burn inside him, not the wild anger of violence, but a heavy fire that told him he had done the right thing. Still, the weight of his choice pressed on him. He reached into his pocket. The coins were gone. Only a few scraps of metal and crumbs of food remained. He had traded his survival for her freedom. 3 credits. Such a small price, yet for him it meant almost everything. He thought of his broken ship waiting in the dockyard. He had planned to buy spare parts, maybe stretch his food for a few more days. Now that hope was gone. He looked at the girl again, wondering if he had made a mistake. But then she looked up at him, her silver eyes glimmering like wet stars. Her fear had not faded, but deep inside those eyes was something else. A faint spark, a question she could not ask. Daniel felt his chest tighten. No, it was not a mistake. He knew in that instant he would rather starve than walk away from her. He guided her to a quieter street, far from the stench of the market. The shadows grew longer as the day began to fade. He stopped beside a wall and crouched to her level. She stood stiff, her chain still dangling from her wrists even though unlocked. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She flinched at the sound of his question. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She shook her head quickly, pulling her arms close. Daniel nodded slowly. He did not push her. "All right. You don't have to tell me yet," he said. His tone was calm. "But I can't keep calling you girl, eh?" He tried to smile, but she only lowered her head again. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small piece of dried bread, his last bit of food. He held it out. "Here, take this." Her eyes widened. She stared at the bread as if it were gold. Her hands trembled, hesitant. She looked at him again, searching his face for trickery. When she saw no anger, no demand, she reached out slowly and took the bread. She ate it in small bites, her lips trembling with every chew. Daniel watched, his chest heavy. How could something so simple, just a crust of bread, mean so much? As she ate, a sound reached them. Heavy boots echoed from the far side of the street. Daniel stiffened. His eyes narrowed as he saw 2 of the traders from the market approaching. Their cruel grins spread as soon as they spotted him with the girl. Well, one of them sneered. "The human actually bought it." The other laughed. 3 credits for that cursed thing. You must be desperate, human." Daniel stepped in front of the girl, his body blocking her, his jaw tightened. He did not want trouble, not now, not when she was so fragile. But the traders moved closer, their eyes filled with mockery. "Tell you what," one said. "Sell her back to us, we'll give you 2 credits for your trouble. You'll even make something back." The girl gasped softly behind him. She clutched his coat as if terrified he might agree. Daniel felt her grip, her desperate need. It went through him like a blade. He looked at the traders, his eyes cold. "No," he said simply. The traders blinked, surprised. "No, she's not for sale." Daniel's voice was calm but firm. His hand rested near the knife at his belt, not as a threat, but as a promise. The traders cursed, spitting on the ground. "Fool, human," one growled. She'll bring you nothing but trouble. They turned away, muttering, their laughter fading into the distance. Daniel stayed still until their footsteps vanished. Then he turned to the girl. She was staring at him with wide eyes, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak. Finally, in the faintest whisper, one word escaped. Why? Daniel blinked. He had not expected her to say anything. Why what? He asked softly. Her voice was weak, broken. Why, not sell me back? Daniel's chest ached. He knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes. Because you're not a thing to be sold, he said. His voice was firm but gentle. You're free now. She stared at him in disbelief. Tears gathered in her eyes but did not fall. She shook her head as if the words made no sense. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Daniel stood and held out his hand. Come on, he said. We need to keep moving before night falls. The girl hesitated, staring at his hand. Slowly, trembling, she placed her small fingers in his. Her skin was cold, but her grip tightened, as if afraid he would let go. As they walked together into the deepening shadows, Daniel felt the weight of his choice again. But now it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a vow. For 3 credits, he had bought more than freedom for a stranger. He had bought a chance to give her life, and maybe, just maybe, to heal his own lonely heart. The night air was cold. As Daniel led the girl through narrow streets, the market noise was far behind them now, but the memory of it clung to her like a shadow. Every step she took seemed heavy, her thin frame shaking as if she expected someone to drag her back into chains. Daniel guided her carefully. His grip on her hand was firm but gentle. She held on to him with trembling fingers, unsure if she could trust this strange human who had paid for her freedom. She did not understand his choice. No one ever chose kindness for someone like her. They reached a quiet corner near the dockyard. The street was empty, lit only by the glow of broken lamps, the smell of smoke and sea salt mixed in the air. Daniel stopped and turned toward her. His eyes softened as he looked at the rope marks on her wrists. You're safe here, he said softly. His voice was calm, steady, and different from the harsh shouts she was used to hearing. He knelt down and unfastened the chains still hanging from her wrists. The rusty metal clattered to the ground. The sound echoed in the night, sharp and final. The girl flinched, then stared at her free hands. Her chest rose and fell quickly. Her eyes shimmered with confusion. She had been in chains for so long that her arms felt strange without them. Daniel sat back and watched her. He could see the fear in her body, but also something more. A question, a hope she did not dare to voice. Slowly, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small cloth. He dipped it into a flask of water and held it out. Here, he said, wipe your face. Her silver eyes widened at the simple gesture. No one had ever cared whether she was dirty or clean. Her hand reached out, slow and uncertain. She touched the cloth and held it close, as if it were something precious. Daniel leaned against the wall, studying her. His mind was restless. He had seen many cruel things in his life, but the way she had been treated at the market burned deeper than anything else. She was not an object, not some cursed thing to be mocked. She was alive, fragile, and in desperate need of a chance. The girl finally gathered the courage to whisper. Her voice was cracked and weak. Why did you buy me? Daniel's chest tightened at her words. He met her gaze. Because no one else would, he said simply. His tone was steady. Because leaving you there would have been wrong. She blinked. Her lips trembled. She did not understand. His words. The traders had told her again and again that she was worthless, cursed, broken. But this human spoke as if she mattered. Her mind could not accept it. Not yet. Daniel reached into his bag again and pulled out a small blanket. He draped it gently over her shoulders. She stiffened at first, then slowly let it wrap around her. The warmth seeped into her cold skin. Her eyes shimmered again, this time not only with fear but with something new. Uncertainty mixed with gratitude. For a long time they sat in silence. The distant hum of ships filled the air. Daniel knew he had little left, no money, no food, no real plan, but he also knew he could not abandon her. He had seen too much pain in her eyes to walk away. Finally, he spoke again. "I don't even know your name." The girl froze. Her mouth opened, but she quickly closed it again. She lowered her head, shaking it slowly. Her silence told him enough. Her name was tied to pain, to chains, to the life she had just escaped. Daniel nodded gently. "It's all right. You don't have to tell me now. You can tell me when you're ready." The girl looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. No one had ever said such words to her before. No one had given her time, choice, or space. For the first time, a small breath of relief escaped her lips. As the night deepened, Daniel stood and motioned for her to follow. "We can't stay here. Come with me." She hesitated but rose to her feet. Her legs were weak, but she walked beside him. Daniel led her through the dockyard until they reached his small ship. The vessel was old, scratched and half broken, but it was still his home. He lowered the ramp and guided her inside. The ship smelled of metal and oil, but it was warmer than the streets. The girl stepped cautiously, her eyes scanning every corner, as if expecting another trap. Daniel pointed to a small bench and said, "Sit, rest." She obeyed quietly, curling into the blanket. As he checked the ship's controls, Daniel thought about the choice he had made. 3 credits, that was all it took to change both their lives. He had no idea what the future would hold, but as he glanced at the fragile figure resting on his bench, he knew one thing. He could not let her return to the shadows. The girl watched him from under the blanket. Her silver eyes studied his face. She had seen cruelty in many forms, but she could not find it in him. Instead, she saw something she did not understand. Loneliness, mixed with kindness. Her lips moved again, soft and hesitant. Lyra." Daniel turned. "What?" She looked down, whispering, "My name is Lyra." The word hung in the air like a fragile flame. Daniel's chest tightened as he nodded. "Lyra," he repeated softly. "That's a good name." For the first time, a faint spark of warmth touched her expression. It was not a smile, not yet, but it was the first step. Daniel sat down across from her, his eyes steady. "You're safe with me, Lyra. Whatever happens next, I promise." The girl stared at him, the blanket pulled close. Her heart was still heavy with fear, but his words lingered. She had never been promised safety before, never been promised anything at all. In the silence of the ship, as stars shimmered faintly outside, the sack that had once covered her head lay forgotten on the ground, and with it, a piece of her old life was left behind. The night stretched, long and heavy as Daniel's ship lifted slowly from the dockyard. The engines groaned, carrying them into the dark skies above the alien city. Stars shimmered faintly through the dirty windows. Lyra sat curled in the blanket, her body still shaking even though she was no longer in chains. Daniel kept his hands on the controls, his face calm but his mind restless. He had saved her, yes. But what came next? He had little food, no money, and a ship that was falling apart. Yet when he glanced at her, thin and silent, he knew he could not regret his choice. The ship drifted into the upper atmosphere, away from the city's smoke. He guided it toward a quiet canyon far beyond the reach of the markets. There he landed, hidden between tall rocks where no trader would follow. The engines powered down, and silence filled the cabin. Daniel stood and moved to the storage compartment. Pulling out what little supplies he had, a small pot, a cracked heater, and a few pieces of dried meat and rice. He set them on the floor and began to cook. The smell of warm food soon spread through the air. Lyra's silver eyes lifted, drawn to the scent. Her stomach growled softly, but she did not move. She had learned long ago not to take food unless it was ordered or thrown. Daniel noticed her hesitation. He broke a piece of the meat and placed it on a tin plate, sliding it gently toward her. "Eat," he said softly. Her hands shook as she reached for the plate. She stared at him once more, searching for anger, finding none. Slowly she brought the food to her mouth and chewed carefully. Each bite was small, but to her it was like tasting life again. Daniel ate quietly across from her. He did not push her to talk. He did not demand anything. He simply let the silence rest between them like a fragile bridge. After some time, he finally spoke. "You must have been through a lot." His voice was calm, not demanding. "If you want to tell me, you can. If not, I won't ask." Lyra froze. Her eyes lowered. She tightened the blanket around herself. Her lips pressed together as if holding back words that burned inside. She had stories, dark and heavy, but the thought of speaking them out loud was terrifying. Still, his voice was different from others. He gave her choice, something she had never known. After a long pause, she whispered, "They took me from my village." Her voice cracked, almost too soft to hear. "I was young. They said I was weak, not worth keeping. They sold me again and again." Her hands trembled, gripping the edge of the blanket. Always with the sack, always in chains. No name, no face, just nothing. Daniel's chest ached at her words. He listened, in silence, not interrupting, not rushing her. When she stopped, he spoke gently. "You're not nothing, Lyra. You never were." Her eyes lifted, wide and uncertain. The words sounded impossible to her, yet the way he said them carried no doubt, no mockery, only truth. That night, the cold wind outside howled against the ship. Daniel gave her his own coat and sat near the heater while she lay wrapped in blankets. She could not sleep. Fear still clung to her. She watched him from the corner of her eye, expecting at any moment that he would show his true nature, that he would be cruel like all the others. But Daniel did not. He simply leaned against the wall, his eyes half closed, exhaustion pulling at him. He kept watch, as if guarding her from shadows. Hours passed, and the silence grew less heavy. Finally, her voice trembled in the dark. "Why are you kind to me?" Daniel opened his eyes slowly. He looked at her, his face calm but tired. "Because someone should have been," he said softly. "And because I know what it feels like. To be alone." Lyra's breath caught. She stared at him. Her heart pounded in her chest. He was lonely too. She could see it in his eyes. The same emptiness she carried inside her. For the first time, she did not feel completely alone. The wind outside grew colder. But inside the ship, something began to change. The distance between them grew smaller, not in steps, but in trust, fragile and slow. Later, when her eyelids grew heavy, she lay down on the bench, her body curled like a child's. Her silver eyes still watched him until sleep finally pulled her away. Daniel sat awake a little longer, staring at the stars through the window. His mind was full of questions about her past, about their future, about how he would keep them alive. But one thing was clear: the $3 he had spent was not a loss. It was the beginning of something larger than he had ever imagined. As the night deepened, Daniel finally let his head rest. He did not move far from her, ready to rise if danger came. Outside the canyon, winds howled, but inside the ship, for the first time in a long while, two lost souls began to share a fragile warmth. And though Lyra's dreams were haunted with chains and shadows, in the corner of her sleep she felt something she had never known before: safety. The next day passed in silence as Daniel worked on the ship. The engines coughed and rattled, and he spent hours tightening bolts, sealing wires, and patching leaks. Lyra sat quietly in the corner, wrapped in her blanket, watching him with cautious eyes. She did not speak, but her gaze followed every move he made. When evening came, Daniel guided the ship to a hidden valley. He landed near a shallow stream where trees bent low and the sky burned with red sunset. He stepped outside first, checking the area. When he was sure it was safe, he lowered the ramp and gestured for Lyra to follow. She hesitated, her bare feet touching the earth as if it were strange to walk free. The wind brushed her hair, carrying the scent of pine and cold water. She clutched the blanket tighter and stepped slowly into the grass. Her eyes widened at the sight of the valley. She had been caged for so long that the open world felt unreal. Daniel gathered dry wood and started a fire. The flames grew, warm and steady. Sparks rose into the night sky. Lyra sat across from him, the light reflecting on her silver markings. She looked almost otherworldly, like a piece of the stars had been carved into her skin. Daniel handed her a tin cup with warm broth he had managed to cook from their scraps. She accepted it with trembling hands, sipping carefully. The warmth spread through her body, chasing away the cold inside her. For a long time they said nothing. Only the crackle of fire and the rustle of night filled the air. Finally, Daniel spoke. "It's beautiful here." His eyes wandered to the sky where the first stars appeared. "I used to sit by fires like this when I was young." Lyra looked at him curiously. Her voice was still soft, but she dared to ask, "Alone?" Daniel shook his head. His gaze softened with memory. "No, with my family. My father used to tell stories by firelight. My mother would cook. My little sister would laugh until she fell asleep in the grass." His voice grew quieter. "That was a long time ago." Lyra listened, her heart tightening. Family, laughter, stories. These were things she had lost before she even knew them. She lowered her eyes, gripping the cup. Her voice trembled. "I don't remember my family. They sold me before I was old enough to know their faces." Daniel's chest ached at her words. He watched her carefully. She did not cry, but the firelight revealed the pain hidden deep inside. He reached for another piece of wood and pushed it into the flames. His voice was steady. "Then you will remember this fire, and you'll remember that tonight you were not alone." Lyra looked up, startled. His words wrapped around her like the blanket she held. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She only stared at him with wide eyes that shimmered in the firelight. The silence stretched again, but it was not heavy this time. It felt warmer, safer. Slowly, she placed her cup on the ground and shifted closer to the fire. For the first time, she allowed the warmth to touch her face without fear. Daniel noticed, but he said nothing. He let her move at her own pace. He only leaned back, stretching his legs, the fire painting his face in orange glow. He looked tired, but also calmer than before. As the night deepened, Lyra found herself whispering, "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel turned his head. "Regret what?" "Buying me," she said softly. Her voice was almost broken. "Spending your last credits on me." Daniel frowned. His eyes held hers. "No," he said firmly. "Not for a second." Her breath caught. She searched his face for lies, but there were none. He spoke as if the truth was simple, unshakable. Something inside her shifted. A small stone moved from her heart. She pulled the blanket tighter and whispered, "I thought I would die there, in the market." Her hands shook. "I thought no one would see me." Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "I saw you." The fire popped, sending sparks into the night. For a long moment, Lyra could not look away from him. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with something she did not recognize. Something softer, warmer, ours. Past and the fire burned low. Daniel moved closer, adding more wood. Lyra watched him, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to be free." Daniel sat beside her now, not too close, but near enough that she could feel his presence. His eyes stayed on the fire. "Freedom is not learned in a day," he said gently. "It takes time, but you don't have to learn it alone." She turned her head toward him. Her silver eyes glimmered with the reflection of flames. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak more. But instead she just nodded. A tiny nod. Fragile, but real. The wind grew colder. Daniel shifted his coat and draped it over her shoulders again. She froze, then slowly allowed it. Her eyes lowered, and for the first time in years she felt safe enough to close them. That night, under the stars and firelight, two broken lives sat side by side. Their words were few, But their silence was full. A bond was beginning to grow, not of chains but of trust, not of ownership but of something deeper. As Lyra drifted into sleep, Daniel kept watch by the fire, his thoughts heavy yet strangely lighter than before. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but as he looked at the girl resting in his coat, he felt a spark inside himself he thought had died long ago. And in the quiet of the valley, with firelight fading into the night, Daniel and Lyra took their first true step toward becoming something neither had ever known before: a family. The sun rose slowly over the valley, painting the sky with pale gold. Daniel stretched his arms after a long night of half-sleep. The fire had burned out, leaving behind only faint smoke. Beside him, Lyra stirred beneath the blanket. Her silver eyes blinked open, soft and uncertain. For a moment she looked confused. Then she remembered where she was. By a fire, not in chains. Wrapped in warmth and not locked in darkness. She sat up slowly, clutching the blanket as if afraid it might be taken away. Daniel gave her a small nod. "Morning," he said gently. His voice was calm, steady. He reached into his bag and pulled out the last of their dried rice, cooking it in a pot of water from the stream. The smell was plain but comforting. Lyra watched him carefully. She was still learning his ways, still waiting for him to turn cruel like all the others had. But every hour that passed without anger confused her more. Why was he different? They ate in silence, sharing the small meal. Daniel gave her the bigger portion without hesitation, she noticed, her hands tightening on the bowl, but she said nothing. After breakfast, Daniel began preparing the ship again. He needed to find supplies soon. Without fuel and food, they would not last. Lyra followed him, stepping carefully, trying not to be in the way. At midday, they walked beyond the valley to gather more wood and search for fruit trees. The forest was quiet, shadows. Moving between the tall trunks, Lyra stayed close, her bare feet crunching on dry leaves. She glanced around nervously, every sound making her tense. Suddenly, the bushes rustled. Daniel raised his hand, signaling her to stay behind him. A group of rough-looking bandits stepped out, alien men with jagged weapons and hungry eyes. They looked at Daniel first, then at Lyra, their faces twisting into cruel smiles. "Well, what do we have here?" One sneered. "A lonely human and his pretty little pet." Lyra froze, fear flooding her body. Her fingers gripped Daniel's sleeve. She knew these kinds of men. She had seen their faces before. Daniel felt her trembling and stepped forward, shielding her with his body. "We don't want trouble," Daniel said firmly. His hand moved slowly to the knife at his belt, his eyes sharp but calm. The bandits laughed. "Trouble? You already found it," one of them said. They stepped closer, their weapons gleaming in the sunlight. "Hand the girl over, human, and maybe we'll let you walk away." Lyra gasped softly. Her nails dug into Daniel's sleeve. She looked up at him with wide eyes, terrified he might give her away. That was always what happened before. People always traded her to save themselves. But Daniel's jaw tightened. His voice grew colder. "She's not yours to take." The bandits snarled, and in a heartbeat they lunged forward. Daniel drew his knife, moving fast. He blocked the first strike, twisting the blade out of one attacker's hand. Another swung at him, but Daniel ducked low and struck back with a hard punch. The fight was quick but fierce. Lyra stood frozen, her heart pounding. She wanted to run, but her legs would not move. All she could do was watch as Daniel fought to protect her. His movements were sharp, not perfect, but full of determination. Finally, the bandits cursed and stumbled back. Two were bleeding, one clutching a broken arm. Their leader spat on the ground. "Not worth it. We'll get you next time, human." They vanished into the trees, their threats fading with distance. Daniel stood, breathing hard, blood on his arm from a shallow cut. He turned quickly to Lyra. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears shining in her eyes. She could not speak. Instead, she stared at him, her chest tight. No one had ever fought for her before. No one had ever stood between her and danger. Daniel sheathed his knife, wincing from the cut. Lyra rushed forward without thinking. She grabbed his arm gently, her hands trembling. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "It's nothing," he said, trying to pull away. But she held tighter, shaking her head. She tore a strip of fabric from her blanket and carefully tied it around his wound. Her fingers were clumsy but gentle. Her eyes focused, determined. Daniel watched her in silence. A strange warmth filled his chest as she cared for him. She had every reason to hide, every reason to stay distant, but in that moment, she chose to help. When the bandage was done, Lyra looked up, her voice shook. Why would you fight for me?" Daniel met her gaze, his voice was steady. "Because you're worth fighting for." Her breath caught, her heart raced. She stared at him as if the world had shifted beneath her feet. Worth fighting for. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever believed it. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Daniel raised his hand slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished. When she didn't, he gently brushed the tears from her face. His voice was soft. "You're not alone anymore, Lyra, you never will be." She broke, her small body shaking as sobs escaped her. She buried her face against his chest, clinging to him as if afraid he would vanish. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, holding her steady. His own eyes closed. His loneliness felt lighter in that moment, replaced with something new. Connection, as the sun set behind the trees, painting the sky in orange fire. Daniel and Lyra sat together by the stream, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her. They did not speak, but they did not need to. That night, back at the fire, Lyra finally smiled. It was small, faint, but it was real. Daniel saw it and felt something stir deep inside. For the first time in many years, he felt like he belonged. And in that fragile smile, in the warmth of her presence, he knew the truth. She was no longer just a stranger. She was becoming family. The days turned into weeks as Daniel and Lyra traveled together. Each morning began with firelight and the quiet rustle of the valley. Each night ended with stars above and silence between them that grew less heavy. The bond between them deepened with every step. Daniel worked hard to repair his ship, finding scraps in abandoned outposts, trading what little he could. Lyra stayed, close, helping in small ways. Her hands were clumsy at first, but she learned quickly. She carried wood, cleaned tools, even stitched torn fabric with patience. Each act, no matter how small, made her feel less like a shadow and more like a person again. Sometimes at night by the fire, she told fragments of her past. Her voice was quiet, her eyes lowered. She spoke of cold cages, cruel hands, and endless nights under the sack. Daniel listened without interrupting. His chest ached with every word. He never asked for more than she could give. He simply listened. And in return, she began to listen to his stories too. He spoke of his family, the small farm he once called home, the laughter of his little sister, the warmth of his parents' love. His voice carried both sorrow and longing. Lyra leaned closer as he spoke, as if trying to hold on to every word. For her, his memories became windows into a life she had never known. One evening, after a long day of gathering supplies, Daniel surprised her with something new. He had carved a small wooden pendant from a tree branch shaped like a star. He handed it to her by the fire. "For you," he said simply. Lyra stared at it, her eyes wide. Her hands trembled as she held the small star. No one had ever given her a gift, not once in her entire life. She clutched it to her chest, whispering, "Why?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Because you deserve something that's yours." Her heart swelled with emotion she could not put into words. She held the pendant as if it were the most precious thing in the world. And in that moment, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of more than chains. As the weeks passed, Daniel and Lyra grew closer, not only in survival but in spirit. She began to laugh softly at his quiet jokes. He began to smile more when she sat beside him. They moved like two pieces of a broken puzzle, finding their place together. But life in the wild was not easy. Danger came again. Storms, hunger, and the threat of bandits who lingered in the forests. Yet every time Daniel stood between her and harm. And slowly Lyra began to stand with him too. She was no longer the trembling girl with the sack on her head. She was learning courage, learning trust. One night, as the fire burned low, Lyra turned to Daniel, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Her voice was steady though soft. "I don't want to be alone ever again." Daniel met her gaze, his chest tightened. He reached out and held her hand, his voice firm. "You won't be. Not as long as I'm alive." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but this time they were not only of sorrow, they were of relief, of hope. She leaned closer, resting her head against his shoulder. For the first time, she felt not like a burden, but like she belonged. The days stretched into months. Together they built something new. They found a small abandoned cabin near the edge of a quiet meadow. Daniel worked tirelessly to repair it, fixing the roof, cleaning the walls, turning it into a home. Lyra decorated it with flowers she picked from the fields. She placed her wooden star on the windowsill where the sun could touch it each morning. Slowly, the cabin became more than shelter. It became a place of warmth, a place of belonging. Daniel hunted and traded for supplies. Lyra cooked and cared for the fire. Their lives wove together like threads. One evening, as the sun set behind golden hills, Daniel stood outside the cabin, watching Lyra laugh softly as she fed a small bird from her hand. The sight filled him with a warmth he had not felt in years. His loneliness was gone, replaced with something steady and real. He stepped closer, his voice calm but certain. "Lyra," she turned, her silver eyes shining. "Yes?" He swallowed, his heart heavy yet light. "I don't see you as someone I rescued anymore. I see you as my family." His words were slow, but every syllable true. Lyra froze. Her heart raced. She searched his face, expecting hesitation, but there was none. Only truth, only love. Her lips trembled. "Family," she whispered, tasting the word as if it were sacred. She stepped closer, placing her hand in his. "Then, I am yours, and you are mine." Daniel's throat tightened. He nodded, his hand closing gently over hers. In that moment, under the fading light of the sky, they were no longer two broken souls. They were one family, built not from blood or chains, but from choice. As night fell and the fire crackled inside their cabin, Lyra placed her star pendant on the table beside them. She smiled faintly, her first true smile. Daniel sat beside her, their shoulders touching. Their silence was no longer empty, it was full of promise. And so the girl once sold for 3 credits found her place, not as property, not as a shadow, but as a wife, a partner, a family. And the lonely human who had once walked the market of shadows found his answer at last, not in wealth, not in escape, but in love. Together they had built a home for 2,